We're kind of wrapping up our fall stewardship program. So Jason Crayton, son of the congregation, teacher at Milwaukee Lutheran High School, and inventor of a game, Factions. So he's got our testimony this morning. Yeah, it's on. It's
good morning, everyone. So I'm Jason, so I'm a longtime member here at Mount Calvary, but I'm also alum of Mount Calvary too as well as a former student. And so I'm here to talk about legacy and the role Mount Calvary has played in my life. And I would say when people think of legacy, they think about what we leave behind. But I would say for us as Christians, it's more so about the here and now. And specifically, I would say it's about two things, about people and purpose. So I went to Mount Calvary from 1st to 8th grade. I graduated in 2000, so when people thought the world was going to end when it was Y2K. But from there, what I really learned was, of course, I experienced really awesome memories from recess to chapel to ascendant care. But it was really the idea that ingrained here at Mount Calvary was Jesus' command for us to love God and love others. And so the first thing I want to talk about here is people. As a student, I had a really important teacher who helped form me as a child, but also kind of forms the way I kind of see things as an adult, and that's Dr. James Frazee. We just called him Mr. Frazee then. But so as a student, it's the way that he valued us, the way that he saw us, and so it was that we deserved to be here. And it wasn't just the academics. I tell you now, as an adult with gray in my beard, I don't remember the academics as much, but I do remember the way that he made us feel and the way that he helped us belong, the way he engaged with us, the way he talked to us, the way that he would play with us during recess. So we felt like we were a part of this school body. And so one thing that he embodied is that God has called us to have the Spirit work through us so we can call people and draw them closer to Christ. But it's not just about the spiritual element, it's also the physical and mental element that we're called to build people up into as well. And so now as a current teacher, that's something that I really hold dear and try to implement in my own classroom as much as I can. And so what I'd like to talk about as well is purpose. So I am a Lutheran educator, and so learning about what that means as a student at Mount Calvary, and also going to Milwaukee Lutheran for 4 years and seeing what that could mean in my life, that's been an important part of what I'm called to do. And so as a teacher, I grew up, of course, in the church. I grew up in Lutheran education, but seeing a lot of students that have not had that experience in their life. I've personally been able to see some of the traumas that they have, some of the pain that they have, some of the broken families that they come up in, some of the broken communities that they grew up in, and the impact that makes on them, and why it's so important to be brought up in that and see that. And so through that, I see the many gifts and talents that they have, the perspective they have, and the story that they have too as well. And so for me, understanding that they have these things that they can use, but they cannot fully use them and fully understand them until they understand what that role in Christ can be and what that means for them in their role in their lives. And that's why it's so important for me to be able to teach them 5 days a week, but then come back here and understand that they're broken, but so am I. I am deeply flawed. I am selfish. I am impatient. And so whether I grew up as a Christian or whether I'm a baby Christian like some of them, that we are all on the same playing field when we come here and we confess that we are sinners. And I think learning that as a child and being able to experience that every day as an adult helps me as I try to reach them and I try to make an impact on them. And so the last thing I want to talk about specifically in regards to the role that Mount Calvary has had in my life is people and purpose together. So for me as a student at Mount Calvary, I grew up and I have two friends that I'm super close to. So Peter Ferry and Tim Frazee, and some of you know them. And so we have these memories that we share here at Mount Calvary, and if you've ever been around us when we actually are together in person, we constantly talk about that, probably to the point where our wives can recite some of those stories, and they're probably tired of hearing some of those stories. But that's a huge bond that we share. And so even in my creative endeavors and the things that I do outside of teaching started here. And so for me, understanding that God put me here for a reason, and there's a purpose for that, And so then being able to use that purpose to be able to impact other people because we're called to serve. And so the game that Peter and I created, we started making it here in 5th grade and kind of building upon our bond that we have. But part of that creative endeavor is understanding that we're called to serve. And so that game we made is to represent that God has this variety in his design. It's a beautiful design. And so for us to bring attention to people of other ethnicities, other cultures, and their stories that go along with that. And so that should be celebrated. And so one time someone asked me, like, oh, like Peter, he's like a great ally. And I was like, well, I don't really view him as an ally. I view him as my brother. And so having that perspective, and then understanding that we take that perspective when we lift other people up, when we build other people up, is a huge element of my experience as a child and my perspective from that experience as an adult. And so one thing I worked on as far as the creative endeavors, I'm working on a graphic novel, which is just a giant comic book, about my experience here at Mount Calvary, so loosely based upon that, about when my brother passed away, and the bond that built with my best friends, Peter and Tim and Dave, and how we use that bond and that relationship to be able to lift each other up. Because those stories and that perspective can be used to help other people, and that's what we're called to do. And I think that's one of the biggest things and the biggest takeaways from my experience as a child here at Mount Calvary, my membership in this body of Christians here at Mount Calvary that I get to be a part of every day, is that we've been given these gifts and these talents and this perspective that we can use, but it's in service of others. I get to see Pastor do that now as an adult. It's not just the way he serves his congregation, but also the way he chooses to serve his community through the garden and then the other things that he does. And that's the biggest takeaway as for my life, seen as a child, to grow up in this and what it can mean and what it can do, but then how we can serve others. Thank you.
I'll break that out on YouTube